The blue and red lights reflecting off my snowplow blade at 5:30 in the morning told me everything I needed to know about my new neighborhood before I'd even finished clearing my driveway. I killed the engine and climbed down from my 2019 Ford F350 with its custom 8-foot plow attachment, my breath forming clouds in the freezing February air. The officer was already out of his cruiser, and I could see him trying to keep a straight face as he approached. Behind him, standing on her perfectly cleared driveway 3 houses down, was a woman in a pink bathrobe with her arms crossed, looking like she'd just won the lottery. "Morning, sir," the officer said, and I recognized the voice immediately. It was Officer Jake Martinez, one of my squad members from the precinct. Got a complaint about illegal snow removal operations in a residential zone. I kept my expression neutral, though I wanted to laugh. "That right?" Jake's lips twitched. "Yes, sir. Apparently, you're operating heavy machinery without proper permits, disturbing the peace, and violating HOA Ordinance Section 12.7 regarding approved snow removal methods." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm supposed to cite you." The woman in the pink bathrobe started marching toward us, her fuzzy slippers making determined tracks through the snow. I recognized her from the passive-aggressive note she'd left on my door last week about my garbage cans being visible from the street for approximately 4 hours after pickup. Her name was Patricia Hendricks, and she was the president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association in Sterling Heights, Michigan. "Officer, thank you for responding so quickly," Patricia called out, her voice cutting through the early morning silence like a circular saw. "This man has been flagrantly violating our community standards since he moved in 3 months ago. Today's offense is just the latest in a string of violations." Jake looked at me, and I could see the recognition dawning in his eyes even in the dim streetlight. "Commander Irving," he said, his voice dropping. "I didn't realize you lived in this neighborhood." The smile that spread across his face was slow and genuine, the kind that comes when you realize your boss just got hassled by a power-hungry HOA president at dawn for the crime of clearing his own driveway. "I'm Commander Kyle Irving, 38 years old, 15 years with the Sterling Heights Police Department, and apparently a menace to suburban society for owning a snowplow." Patricia stopped short, her confidence wavering for just a moment. "Commander, as in police commander?" "That would be correct," I said, extending my hand to Jake for a handshake. "Morning, Martinez. Sorry you got called out here for this." "No problem, sir," Jake said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Just doing my job." Patricia recovered quickly, puffing up like an indignant hen. "I don't care what your job title is. The HOA has rules, and those rules apply to everyone in this community. Your position doesn't give you special privileges to violate our ordinances." I turned to face her fully, keeping my expression professional. "Mrs. Hendricks, I'm clearing snow from my own driveway on my own property using my own equipment. There's no city ordinance against that, and I'm doing it before 6 a.m. to avoid disturbing anyone during normal hours. The HOA covenant clearly states that all snow removal must be performed by the association's approved contractor," Patricia said, pulling a piece of paper from her bathrobe pocket. She'd actually brought documentation to a 5:30 a.m. confrontation. "You signed that covenant when you purchased your home." "I read that covenant," I replied. "It says the HOA will provide snow removal services for common areas. My driveway isn't a common area." Patricia's face was turning an interesting shade of red that matched the patrol car's lights. "The covenant also states that residents may not operate commercial vehicles on their property for business purposes. That snowplow is clearly a commercial vehicle." Jake cleared his throat. "Madam, That's actually not a commercial vehicle by Michigan law. It's a personal truck with a snow removal attachment. The commander isn't running a business, he's just clearing his own property. I want him cited anyway, Patricia insisted, for disturbing the peace. I was awakened by the noise of his plow at 5:15 this morning. I'd had enough. Mrs. Hendricks, I was plowing because we got 14 inches of snow overnight, and I need to get to work by 7. If I wait for your approved contractor, I'd be here until noon based on how they've performed the last 3 snowstorms. That's not my problem, Patricia snapped. Rules are rules. If you don't like them, you shouldn't have moved into a community with an HOA. Jake looked between us, clearly trying to figure out how to defuse the situation. Madam, I can't cite the commander for clearing his own driveway. There's no violation of any city, county, or state law. Your HOA dispute would need to be handled through your association's internal process. Then, I'll file a complaint with your superiors about your unwillingness to enforce the law, Patricia threatened. My superior is standing right in front of you, Jake said, and I had to give him credit for keeping a straight face. Patricia's mouth opened and closed a few times, reminding me of a fish I'd caught last summer. This is ridiculous. The HOA will be hearing about this. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. You do that, I said calmly. In the meantime, I'm going to finish clearing my driveway so I can get to work and keep this community safe. Have a good morning, Mrs. Hendricks. I turned and climbed back into my truck, giving Jake a small nod. He returned to his patrol car, probably to file the most entertaining report of his career. Patricia stood in the middle of the street for another minute, clearly trying to figure out her next move, before stomping back to her house. The rest of my driveway took another 20 minutes to clear. By the time I finished, a few of my neighbors were emerging to start their own snow removal. My next-door neighbor, Tim Chen, gave me a thumbs up as I put the plow away. He dealt with Patricia's wrath over his basketball hoop, which apparently violated the recreational equipment visibility standards. I went inside, took a hot shower, and got ready for work. My wife, Sarah, was already up, making coffee in the kitchen. She'd heard the whole thing from our bedroom window. So the HOA called the cops on you, she said, handing me a mug. That's a new one. Patricia Hendricks called the cops on me, I corrected, and got one of my own officers, Sarah laughed. The look on her face when she realized must have been priceless. It was pretty good, I admitted, but this isn't over. She's calling an emergency board meeting. Let her. You didn't violate any actual laws. The HOA can complain all they want. I wished I shared her optimism, but I dealt with enough petty tyrants in my career to know that people like Patricia didn't let things go. If anything, the public embarrassment would make her double down. I wasn't wrong. When I got home from work that evening, there was a certified letter taped to my front door. Inside was a notice of violation, a $500 fine, and a summons to appear before the HOA board in 1 week. The charges were lengthy. Operating commercial equipment in a residential zone, creating excessive noise during restricted hours, failing to use approved contractors, and my personal favorite, displaying an aggressive attitude toward community leadership. Sarah read it over my shoulder. $500. For plowing your own driveway. It's about control, I said, tossing the letter on the kitchen counter. Patricia needs everyone to know she's in charge. Are you going to pay it? Not a chance. The next day at work, the story had already made the rounds. Jake had apparently told a few people, who told a few more people, and by lunch, half the department knew that the commander had been reported to his own officer by an angry HOA president. Captain Denise Morrison stopped by my office with a grin. "Heard you're a dangerous criminal now," she said. Operating heavy machinery without authorization. Very serious stuff. Laugh it up, I said. Wait until you retire to the suburbs. I'm staying in my apartment until I die, Denise said. No HOAs for me, but seriously, you okay? Jake said that woman seemed pretty unhinged. I've dealt with worse, I said. She's just used to people rolling over when she throws her weight around. Well, she picked the wrong person this time. Let me know if you need a character witness at your HOA trial. The week passed quickly. Work was busy with the usual February problems. Cold weather bringing out the worst in people, domestic disputes, traffic accidents on icy roads, and the occasional major case that required actual detective work. I'd been with the Sterling Heights Police Department long enough to have seen most things, but the combination of administrative duties and field work kept things interesting. The night before the HOA board meeting, I reviewed the covenant documents I'd signed when we bought the house. Sarah and I had purchased the property in Maple Grove back in November, attracted by the good schools and quiet streets. The HOA fees were reasonable, and the covenant hadn't seemed too restrictive at the time. Now, I was seeing the fine print in a new light. The section Patricia cited about snow removal was vague at best. It stated that the HOA would maintain common areas including snow removal, and that residents should coordinate with approved vendors for property maintenance to ensure community standards. Nothing explicitly forbade personal snow removal. The commercial vehicle clause was about running businesses from home, not personal use of work equipment. I put together a folder with relevant sections highlighted, printed copies of Michigan Vehicle Code, and photos of my truck showing it was clearly a personal vehicle with a removable plow attachment. If Patricia wanted a fight, I'd give her one. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived at 7 p.m., the parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, word had gotten around that there might be entertainment tonight. Inside, the main room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs for residents. Patricia sat in the center seat, flanked by 4 other board members I vaguely recognized from neighborhood functions. She dressed for the occasion in a severe gray suit that made her look like she was presiding over a corporate merger instead of a suburban HOA meeting. The chairs were mostly full, which was unusual. Tim Chen sat in the back row and waved me over. "Wouldn't miss this," he whispered. "Half the neighborhood is here to watch Patricia go after a police commander." "Great," I muttered. "Glad I could provide the evening's entertainment." Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. She went through the standard opening procedures, minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, all delivered in a clipped, officious tone. Then she got to the main event. "We have a special matter to address tonight," she announced. "A violation hearing for Kyle Irving of 42 Birch Street. Mr. Irving, please come forward." I stood and walked to the front, feeling like I was back in grade school being called to the principal's office. Patricia looked pleased with herself, probably imagining this was her moment of triumph. "Mr. Irving, you've been charged with multiple violations of the Maple Grove HOA covenant," Patricia began, reading from a prepared statement. "On February 8th, you operated a commercial snowplow on your residential property without authorization, created excessive noise during restricted hours, failed to utilize approved contractors, and displayed hostility toward HOA leadership. How do you respond to these charges?" I placed my folder on the table. I respond that every single charge is either factually incorrect or based on a misinterpretation of the covenant. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "The facts are clear, Mr. Irving." Multiple residents witnessed your operation of commercial snow removal equipment at 5:15 in the morning. I was using my personal truck to clear my driveway, I said calmly. I have documentation here showing that a 2019 Ford F-350 with a removable plow attachment is classified as a personal vehicle under Michigan law, not commercial equipment. I slid the printed vehicle code across the table. One of the other board members, a thin man named Roger, picked it up and started reading. The covenant prohibits commercial operations, Patricia insisted. I wasn't running a commercial operation. I was clearing my own driveway. The covenant says nothing about residents being forbidden from performing their own property maintenance. The covenant requires coordination with approved vendors, Patricia countered, for major projects and to maintain community standards, I said. Snow removal from a private driveway doesn't fall under that category. The covenant specifically addresses common areas for HOA-provided snow removal. My driveway is not a common area. Roger looked up from the documents. Patricia, he might have a point. The language is pretty specific about common areas. Patricia shot him a glare that could have melted the snow outside. The spirit of the covenant is clear. We maintain certain standards in this community, and those standards include professional snow removal. Where does it say that? I asked. Show me the specific language that forbids a homeowner from clearing their own driveway. Patricia flipped through her copy of the covenant, her face getting redder by the second. It's implied in the overall maintenance standards. Implications aren't enforceable, I said. If the HOA wants to prohibit residents from clearing their own driveways, it needs to be explicitly stated in the covenant. It's not. Another board member, a woman named Linda, spoke up. What about the noise complaint? 5:15 is pretty early. I cleared my driveway early because I had to be at work by 7, and we received 14 inches of snow overnight. The Sterling Heights Noise Ordinance prohibits excessive noise between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. on weekdays, with exceptions for emergency services and necessary activities. Snow removal after a major storm falls under necessary activities. I have a copy of the ordinance here. I provided another document. Linda took it and read it carefully. This is getting off track, Patricia said, her voice rising. The bottom line is that Mr. Irving violated community standards and showed contempt for HOA authority. The fine stands. On what legal basis? I asked. You can't fine me for violating rules that don't exist. The board has discretion to interpret the covenant and enforce community standards, Patricia said. Discretion isn't unlimited, I replied. If I paid this fine, I'd be admitting to a violation I didn't commit. If the HOA wants to change the covenant to explicitly prohibit personal snow removal, you can propose an amendment and put it to a vote of all homeowners. Until then, the existing language doesn't support your position. Roger cleared his throat. Patricia, maybe we should table this and have our lawyer review the covenant language. We don't need a lawyer, Patricia snapped. We need residents who respect the rules. I do respect the rules, I said. That's why I'm challenging this fine. If you enforce penalties based on personal interpretation rather than actual covenant language, you're not following your own rules. The room had gone completely silent. Tim Chen was trying not to grin. Several other residents were nodding along with my arguments. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. This hearing is not a debate, she said coldly. The board will deliberate and issue a decision within 3 business days. You're dismissed, Mr. Irving. I gathered my documents and returned to my seat. The rest of the meeting was brief and tense. Patricia rushed through the remaining agenda items and adjourned as quickly as possible. As people filed out, several neighbors stopped to quietly thank me. Apparently, Patricia had been ruling the HOA with an iron fist for years, and nobody had challenged her before. Tim walked out with me. "That was beautiful," he said. "Did you see her face when you asked for the specific language?" "She's going to come back harder," I warned. "People like her don't back down." "Maybe, but you've got the law on your side. What can she really do?" I found out 2 days later. The certified letter arrived with the board's decision. The fine was upheld, with an additional $250 added for disruption of HOA proceedings. I now owed $750, due within 30 days, or the HOA would place a lien on my property. Sarah was furious when she saw the letter. "They can't do that. You proved they were wrong." "They can do whatever they want until someone stops them," I said. "Patricia controls the board. Roger and Linda might have doubts, but they're not going to stand up to her. So what do we do? Pay the fine?" "No, we fight back. I'm going to file a lawsuit challenging the fine and the HOA's authority to enforce non-existent rules." "Isn't that expensive?" "Probably. But it's the principle. If I pay this, Patricia wins. She'll use the same tactic on everyone else who doesn't fall in line." I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, a sharp woman named Rebecca Coleman, who had a reputation for taking down overreaching associations. She reviewed my documents and loved the case. "This is textbook HOA overreach," Rebecca said during our consultation. "The covenant language doesn't support their position, and adding penalties for defending yourself at a hearing is almost certainly going to be seen as retaliation. We can challenge this easily." "What's the timeline?" "I'll file a complaint in circuit court next week. It'll take a few months to get to trial, but in the meantime, I'll request a preliminary injunction preventing the HOA from placing a lien on your property. That should freeze everything until we get a ruling." "Do it," I said. Rebecca filed the lawsuit the following Monday. The complaint named the Maple Grove HOA, Patricia Hendricks personally, and the other board members. It alleged breach of covenant, arbitrary enforcement, retaliation, and abuse of authority. I also requested attorney fees and compensation for my time. The response from the HOA was predictable. Patricia sent an email to all residents claiming I was attacking the community and trying to destroy the HOA over a minor fine. She called another emergency meeting to discuss the lawsuit and requested that homeowners contribute to a legal defense fund. That meeting didn't go the way Patricia expected. Tim Chen stood up during the open forum and pointed out that the HOA was spending everyone's money to defend an indefensible position. Another neighbor, Maria Gonzalez, said she'd reviewed the covenant herself and agreed that nothing prohibited personal snow removal. A third resident asked why Patricia was taking this personally instead of admitting the fine was wrong. Patricia tried to maintain control, but the cracks were showing. Roger actually sided with the residents, suggesting that the board should settle the lawsuit and clarify the covenant language. Linda agreed. Patricia was outvoted, but she refused to authorize settlement discussions, insisting the HOA would prevail in court. Meanwhile, at work, I was dealing with a more serious situation. We'd been tracking a series of burglaries in the northern part of Sterling Heights, and the case was heating up. Someone was hitting houses during the day when residents were at work, targeting expensive electronics and jewelry. The MO was consistent, professional work, probably someone with experience. Detective Lisa Park was lead on the case, and she pulled me in when the pattern suggested the burglar might be expanding territory. 3 of the latest hits were in neighborhoods adjacent to Maple Grove. "We think he's working from a vehicle, probably a van or SUV," Lisa explained, showing me surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera. He's smart about timing, in and out in under 10 minutes. Any forensics? Nothing useful. Gloves? No forced entry. He's picking locks or finding unlocked doors. We're thinking he might be casing neighborhoods in advance. Tell patrol to increase visibility in the area, I said, and let's get a community alert out. If residents see suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar people, they should call it in. Lisa nodded and headed out to coordinate with patrol. I made a mental note to check my own home security. Living in an HOA community with nosy neighbors like Patricia actually had one advantage: strangers stood out. The preliminary injunction hearing for my lawsuit was scheduled for late March. Rebecca was confident we'd get the injunction, but she warned me that Patricia might try to escalate things before then. She was right. In early March, I received another certified letter, this time notifying me that the HOA was scheduling a hearing to revoke my residency rights and force the sale of my property based on continued violations and hostility to community governance. They can't actually do that, can they? Sarah asked when I showed her the letter. They can try, I said, but forced sale provisions are extremely difficult to enforce. They'd need to prove material breach of the covenant, and clearing my own driveway doesn't qualify. Rebecca was less calm when I forwarded her the letter. This is harassment, she said. Patricia is retaliating against you for filing the lawsuit. We're going to amend our complaint to include this. The amended complaint added claims of harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of my right to quiet enjoyment of my property. Rebecca also requested expedited proceedings given the HOA's escalating actions. The judge assigned to the case, Judge Martha Reynolds, clearly had experience with HOA disputes. She granted the preliminary injunction preventing any enforcement of the fines or property sale proceedings and scheduled a hearing for April 15th to address the broader issues. Patricia's response was to send increasingly unhinged emails to the entire neighborhood. She claimed I was a bully using my police position to intimidate the HOA. She said I was destroying property values by creating legal chaos. She accused me of being a plant from a developer who wanted to dissolve the HOA and build apartments. The emails were so over the top that they actually helped my case. Several neighbors forwarded them to me with messages of support, and Roger finally had enough. He resigned from the board with a public letter explaining that Patricia's vendetta against me had nothing to do with legitimate HOA governance. Linda followed 2 days later. Her resignation letter was more diplomatic, but made the same point. The board was supposed to serve the community, not Patricia's personal agenda. With half the board gone, Patricia tried to appoint replacements, but the covenant required elections. An emergency election was scheduled for late March, and for the first time in years, there were contested races for board positions. Tim Chen decided to run, as did Maria Gonzalez and a retired engineer named Harold Thompson. All three campaigned on a platform of reasonable enforcement and updating the covenant to reflect actual community needs rather than Patricia's preferences. The election wasn't close. Tim, Maria, and Harold won by large margins. Patricia retained her seat. She was elected to a 3-year term the previous year, but she was now in the minority on a 5-person board. The new board's first action was to vote to settle my lawsuit. Over Patricia's furious objections, they agreed to rescind all fines, acknowledge that personal snow removal was permitted, and pay my attorney fees. They also formally apologized. Rebecca reviewed the settlement offer. "This is everything we asked for," she said. If you want to push for damages against Patricia personally, we can, but it'll mean more time in court. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to hold Patricia accountable for the harassment and stress she'd caused, but another part just wanted it over. Accept the settlement, I said. But I want a formal apology from Patricia specifically, on the record. Rebecca negotiated that term, and Patricia was forced to sign a letter acknowledging her actions were inappropriate and apologizing for the harassment. The letter was entered into the court record as part of the settlement. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week after the settlement was finalized, I was working late at the precinct when Detective Park knocked on my office door. "Commander, got something weird on the burglary case. Thought you should see it." I followed her to the detective bureau, where she pulled up surveillance footage on her computer. "This is from yesterday afternoon. House hit on Maple Ridge Drive, about a mile from your neighborhood." The footage showed a woman approaching a house, looking around carefully, then using what appeared to be a lock pick on the front door. She was inside for 8 minutes before emerging with a small bag and walking calmly back to a silver Toyota Camry. "The homeowner reported electronics and jewelry stolen," Lisa said. "Standard pattern for our guy, except our guy appears to be a woman." She zoomed in on the clearest frame. I felt my stomach drop. It was Patricia Hendricks. "You know her?" Lisa asked, catching my expression. "That's my HOA president," I said slowly. "The one who's been trying to find me into bankruptcy." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? Dead serious? Her name is Patricia Hendricks, lives at 115 Birch Street in Maple Grove. Well, that explains the territory expansion. She's been hitting houses near her own neighborhood." Lisa pulled up a map with pins marking all the burglaries. "If we center it on Maple Grove, it's almost a perfect radius. She's working outward from her home base." I sat down heavily. "How many houses?" 14 confirmed hits over the past 2 months. Conservative estimate, she's stolen about $200,000 in property. "Do we have enough for a warrant with this footage?" "Absolutely. The homeowner can identify the stolen items and we've got a clear shot of her face. Plus, if her pattern holds, she's probably storing the stuff at her house until she can fence it." "Let's move on it tomorrow morning," I said. "I want to do this right. No mistakes." Lisa nodded. "You want to recuse yourself, given your history with her?" "Probably should," I admitted. "But I'm going to be there when we execute the warrant. I've earned that much." We spent the next few hours putting together the warrant application. The evidence was solid. Clear surveillance footage, matching MO geographic pattern consistent with her residence as a starting point. Judge Reynolds, the same judge who'd heard my HOA case, signed the warrant at 8 p.m. The next morning, I briefed the team. 6 officers, including Jake Martinez, plus Lisa and myself. We rolled out at 7 a.m., 3 unmarked cars and 1 patrol unit as backup. Patricia's house was a pristine colonial with professional landscaping and a 3-car garage. The silver Camry from the surveillance footage was parked in the driveway. We approached in standard formation, 2 officers covering the back exits, the rest with me at the front door. I rang the doorbell. Patricia answered in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, looking irritated at the early interruption. Her expression shifted to shock when she saw me, then to anger. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Is this more harassment? I swear I'll sue you and the entire department." "Mrs. Hendricks, I have a warrant to search your property," I said, handing her the papers. "Please step aside." She looked at the warrant and all the color drained from her face. "This is a mistake. This is revenge for the HOA situation." "This has nothing to do with the HOA," I said. "This is about 14 counts of breaking and entering, 14 counts of larceny and possession of stolen property. Step aside, please." Patricia backed into the house, still holding her coffee mug. The team spread out, methodically searching each room. It didn't take long. The garage was the jackpot. Shelves lined with electronics still in their boxes, jewelry organized in plastic containers, even 2 laptops. Lisa photographed everything while I documented the location of items. Patricia had collapsed at her kitchen table, crying. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "I just needed money. The HOA account was short and I'd borrowed from it for personal expenses. I was trying to pay it back." That was a confession. I read her Miranda rights while Jake took notes. "You're saying you stole from the HOA funds?" I asked. "I was going to pay it back," Patricia insisted. "But then my husband left and took half our savings. I needed cash fast. The burglaries were supposed to be temporary just until I got back on my feet." "How much did you take from the HOA?" "30,000, she whispered. "I've been moving money around in the accounts to hide it." That was embezzlement on top of the burglary charges. I called Tim Chen and asked him to meet us at the precinct. As board president, he'd need to know about this immediately. We arrested Patricia at 7:45 a.m. She was still in her bathrobe, sobbing about how her life was ruined. Jake led her out to the patrol car while Lisa supervised the evidence collection. The garage contents alone were enough to clear 8 of the 14 burglaries, and I was confident the rest would match up once we completed the inventory. At the precinct, Patricia was processed and booked. The charges were extensive: 14 counts of breaking and entering, 14 counts of larceny, 1 count of embezzlement and possession of burglary tools. Her bond was set at $50,000. Tim arrived at the precinct looking shell-shocked. "I can't believe this." "Patricia stole from the HOA. 30,000 according to her confession," I said. "You're going to need to do a complete audit of the HOA accounts. This is insane. She was so strict about rules, so controlling, and the whole time she was robbing people." "Classic deflection," I said. "She created drama over minor issues to distract from her own crimes. Nobody was looking at her because she was too busy making herself the center of attention." Tim shook his head. "What happens now? She'll be arraigned, probably this afternoon. Given the amount stolen and the number of victims, she's looking at serious prison time. The embezzlement charge adds to it. You should consult with a lawyer about the HOA's exposure and how to recover the stolen funds." "Will we get it back?" "Maybe some of it. Depends on what assets she has." "The prosecutor will push for restitution as part of any plea deal." Patricia's arraignment was that afternoon. She appeared before Judge Theodore Carlson, a no-nonsense jurist who'd been on the bench for 20 years. The prosecutor, Amanda Wu, laid out the charges and requested high bond given the extensive criminal activity. Patricia's public defender, a young guy who looked fresh out of law school, argued for lower bond, pointing out that she had no prior record and was a longtime community resident. Judge Carlson wasn't impressed. "Miss Hendricks, you're charged with 29 separate felonies. The evidence appears substantial. Bond is set at $100,000 cash or surety. You're ordered to surrender your passport and remain in Michigan pending trial. Next court date is May 1st for a preliminary examination." Patricia couldn't make bond. She was remanded to the county jail, where she'd stay until trial unless her family could come up with the money. The story hit the local news that evening. "HOA president arrested in burglary spree" was the headline, accompanied by Patricia's booking photo. The reporter interviewed several victims, who expressed shock that a neighborhood leader was responsible for violating their homes. My name came up briefly. The reporter mentioned that I was the commander who'd led the investigation, but the focus was on Patricia's crimes rather than our HOA dispute. Still, Some enterprising journalist found out about the lawsuit and made the connection. The follow-up story the next day had a new angle. HOA president who called police on commander arrested by same commander. That one went semi-viral on social media, with commenters calling it poetic justice and karma. I tried to stay out of the media circus, but the department's public information officer set up one press conference to address questions. I kept my comments brief and professional. This investigation was about protecting our community from a serial burglar, I said. The fact that the suspect was my HOA president is coincidental. We followed the evidence, and the evidence led us to Miss Hendricks. I'm grateful we were able to recover a significant amount of stolen property and bring closure to the victims. A reporter asked if the HOA dispute had motivated the investigation. I shut that down immediately. The investigation began before I had any knowledge of Miss Hendricks' criminal activity. We were tracking a pattern of burglaries and following leads. The surveillance footage identified the suspect. At that point, it didn't matter who she was or what our personal history might be. She committed crimes and we did our jobs. The preliminary examination in May was straightforward. The prosecutor presented the surveillance footage, victim testimony, and photos of the recovered stolen property. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but Judge Carlson wasn't buying it. Counsel, I'm looking at video of your client breaking into a house and emerging with stolen property. That's not circumstantial. Miss Hendricks is bound over for trial on all counts. The trial was scheduled for August. In the meantime, the Maple Grove HOA was dealing with the aftermath. Tim, Maria, and Harold brought in a forensic accountant who confirmed Patricia had embezzled $32,000 over 2 years. She'd been creating fake invoices from vendors and paying herself. The HOA filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia for the embezzlement and mismanagement. They also reviewed every decision she'd made as president and found numerous other violations, including awarding contracts to companies owned by her relatives and approving spending without board votes. My neighbors were shocked and embarrassed. Several people apologized to me for not standing up to Patricia sooner. I told them not to worry about it. Nobody expects their HOA president to be a criminal mastermind. Sarah thought the whole thing was darkly funny. You got sued for plowing snow, and it turns out the person suing you was robbing houses. You can't make this stuff up. Makes for a good story, I agreed, though I could have done without the stress. At least you got your attorney fees back, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. That counts for something. Patricia's trial began on August 15th. I was called as a witness to testify about the investigation and arrest. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline, from the initial burglary reports to the surveillance footage to the search warrant. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, suggesting I'd targeted his client because of our HOA dispute. Amanda Wu objected immediately. Your Honor, Commander Irving didn't identify the suspect. The surveillance footage did. The detective investigating the burglaries brought the footage to the commander, who recognized the suspect. At that point, proper procedures were followed to obtain a warrant based on probable cause. Judge Carlson sustained the objection. Counsel, unless you have evidence that Commander Irving fabricated evidence or violated procedure, this line of questioning is irrelevant. The defense couldn't produce any such evidence because there wasn't any. The case was solid, and the jury knew it. Patricia took the stand in her own defense, which was a mistake. She tried to explain that she'd been under financial stress, that her husband leaving had devastated her, that she'd made bad decisions but wasn't a bad person. Amanda Wu destroyed her on cross-examination. Miss Hendricks, you broke into 14 homes over a 2-month period, correct? Yes, but I was desperate. You stole over $200,000 in property from your neighbors and community members. I didn't think of it that way. How did you think of it? I just needed money to fix my problems. Did you consider getting a job, taking out a loan, asking family for help? Those options weren't available. But breaking into people's homes was. Patricia had no good answer. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Sentencing was in September. The victims gave impact statements describing how violated they felt, how Patricia's crimes had destroyed their sense of security in their own homes. Tim testified about the HOA embezzlement and the damage Patricia had done to the community's trust. Judge Carlson sentenced Patricia to 12 years in prison with credit for time served. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, including the HOA. Miss Hendricks, you held a position of trust and authority in your community, Judge Carlson said. You violated that trust in the worst possible way. You stole from your neighbors, embezzled from an organization you were supposed to serve, and when caught, you tried to blame others for your crimes. The sentence reflects the serious and sustained nature of your criminal conduct. Patricia was led away in handcuffs, still crying. I felt no satisfaction in seeing her sentenced, just relief that it was over. The Maple Grove HOA moved on. Tim, Maria, and Harold proved to be excellent board members, focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. They revised the covenant to clarify ambiguous language and remove outdated restrictions. One of their first acts was to formally acknowledge that residents could perform their own property maintenance, including snow removal, as long as it met reasonable safety standards. They also implemented financial controls to prevent future embezzlement and required regular audits. My relationship with the HOA became cordial and professional. When the next big snowstorm hit in January, I plowed my driveway at 5 a.m. without incident. Tim actually stopped by afterward to thank me for also clearing the sidewalk in front of his house. You didn't have to do that, he said. Just being neighborly, I replied. That's what communities are supposed to be about. The story became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents were told about the HOA president, who called the cops on a police commander for plowing snow, only to get arrested by the same commander for burglary. It was a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and a reminder that people in positions of power aren't always what they seem. For me, it reinforced something I'd learned over 15 years in law enforcement. Justice doesn't care about titles or positions or who you think you are. The law applies equally to everyone, whether you're a homeowner or an HOA president or a police commander. As winter turned to spring and then summer, life in Maple Grove settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA functioned as it should, maintaining common areas and facilitating community connections without turning into a petty dictatorship. Property values stayed strong, not because of rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules, but because people actually wanted to live there. Sarah and I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in July, and nearly everyone on our street came. People talked about normal things like kids and jobs and vacation plans, not HOA violations or bylaws or fines. It felt like what a community was supposed to be. Jake Martinez stopped by during the barbecue, off-duty and dressed in casual clothes. He still got a kick out of the story. "You know that call is going to follow me my entire career," he said, grinning. "Martinez, aren't you the guy who tried to ticket his own commander for plowing snow?" "Could be worse," I said. "You could be the guy who let a serial burglar off with a warning." "True. At least we got a good arrest out of it." We clinked beer bottles and watched the sun set over the neighborhood. The sound of kids playing basketball echoed from Tim's driveway, where the hoop Patricia had complained about still stood. Someone's dog was barking happily in a backyard. Music drifted from the community center, where the new board was hosting a summer concert series. It was peaceful. Normal. Exactly what suburban life was supposed to be. Patricia's name came up occasionally, usually as a reference point for what not to do. The new board members were careful to avoid her mistakes, checking themselves when they got too focused on minor issues, and remembering that their job was to serve the community, not control it. The recovered stolen property had been returned to the victims, though some items were never found. The HOA's civil lawsuit against Patricia was essentially unrecoverable. She had no assets, and her wages as an inmate weren't enough to make a dent in the $32,000 judgment. But at least, the criminal case had brought closure and accountability. I continued my career with the Sterling Heights Police Department, handling the usual mix of cases and administrative duties. The burglary clearance rate in our district improved significantly after Patricia's arrest, which wasn't surprising since she'd been responsible for a chunk of the recent cases. Detective Park got promoted to sergeant based on her excellent work on the case. She joked that she should send Patricia a thank you card for padding her arrest statistics. Life moved on. The Snowplow incident became a funny story I told at police department gatherings, usually edited down to the essentials. HOA president called the cops on me for plowing my driveway. Turned out she was a burglar. Karma won. It always got laughs. But it also served as a teaching moment for younger officers. I used it to illustrate several important principles. Evidence is king. Don't let personal feelings influence investigations, and never underestimate what people are capable of hiding. Patricia had seemed like nothing more than an annoying busybody, yet she'd been running a sophisticated criminal operation right under everyone's noses. The case also reminded me why I'd chosen this career. At its core, law enforcement is about protecting people and holding wrongdoers accountable. It doesn't matter if the wrongdoer is a stranger in a ski mask or a respected community leader in a pink bathrobe. Justice is blind, and it should be. As fall approached and the leaves started turning, I found myself preparing for another winter season. The snowplow attachment was serviced and ready. The truck was tuned up. When the first forecast of snow appeared on the weather app, I actually smiled. This time, when I cleared my driveway at 5 a.m. on a cold December morning, the only response from my neighbors was a few appreciative waves and one text from Tim asking if I could hit his driveway too since his blower was broken. I did, because that's what good neighbors do. The blue and red lights never came back. The certified letters stopped arriving. The HOA functioned quietly and effectively in the background, exactly as it should. And Patricia Hendricks served her sentence, a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting power go to your head and thinking you're above the rules you enforce on others. I never did figure out if she'd targeted me specifically with that first complaint because I was a cop and she knew she was committing crimes, or if she was just naturally controlling and the complaint was random bad luck on my part. Maybe it was both. Maybe she saw my truck and badge and felt threatened, so she lashed out first to establish dominance. Or maybe she was just the kind of person who needed to be in charge, who couldn't stand anyone not following her rules, and the criminal behavior was separate from the HOA tyranny. Some people are just wired that way, needing control over every aspect of their environment to feel secure. Whatever her motivations, the result was the same. She went to prison, the community healed, and I got to plow my driveway in peace. Sometimes justice works exactly as it should, even if it takes a few twists and turns to get there. The story had one final chapter the following spring. I was at the precinct when I got a call from the prison where Patricia was serving her sentence. She wanted to speak with me. I almost declined. I had no interest in hearing her excuses or justifications, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to a phone call. Commander Irving, Patricia's voice was subdued, none of the sharp authority she'd wielded as HOA president. Thank you for taking my call. What do you want, miss? Hendricks, I wanted to apologize, not the court-ordered apology from the settlement, a real one. I waited, saying nothing. I was wrong about everything, she continued. The snowplow complaint, the fines, the harassment. I was trying to control something because my life was falling apart and you were an easy target. I see that now. You could have just let me clear my driveway, I said. I know. I should have. But I couldn't stand anyone not following my rules. It made me feel like I was losing control, and control was all I had left after my husband left and I'd stolen all that money. You made your choices, Miss Hendricks. You'll have to live with them. I am. Every day. But I wanted you to know that you were right. About the covenant, about the HOA, about everything. I was wrong and I'm sorry. I appreciate you saying that. There was a long pause. How is the neighborhood? It's good. The new board is doing a great job. People actually like the HOA now. That's good. That's how it should be. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly small talk about nothing important. When the call ended, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly. Patricia had caused too much damage for that. But maybe closure, a recognition that people are complicated, and even those who do terrible things are still human. I never spoke to Patricia again. She served her sentence and was released after 9 years with good behavior. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to another state to live with family, trying to rebuild her life far from the community she'd betrayed. Maple Grove continued to thrive. Tim served 3 terms as HOA president before stepping down to focus on his family. Maria took over and proved equally effective. The covenant was updated every few years to reflect changing needs, always with full community input and transparent processes. I made captain 2 years after Patricia's trial and eventually deputy chief 3 years after that. The Snowplow story followed me through each promotion, told and retold by officers who found it hilarious that my HOA president had called the cops on me and ended up in prison. The story became part of department lore, a reminder that truth is often stranger than fiction, and that you never really know what's going on behind closed doors. It also became a teaching tool for new recruits about the importance of following evidence wherever it leads, even when it takes you somewhere unexpected. Years later, when I'd retired and was writing my memoirs, the Snowplow incident got its own chapter. It had everything: conflict, resolution, unexpected twists, and a satisfying ending. But more than that, it illustrated something fundamental about human nature and the systems we create to govern ourselves. HOA, like any organization, are only as good as the people running them. In the right hands, they can enhance communities and protect property values while respecting individual rights. In the wrong hands, they become petty dictatorships that stifle freedom and create conflict. The difference isn't in the rules themselves, but in how those rules are interpreted and enforced. Patricia represented the worst of HOA culture, someone who valued control over community, who used rules as weapons rather than tools, and who ultimately believed she was above the very standards she demanded from others. Her downfall was inevitable, whether through my investigation or someone else's eventually, because that kind of hypocrisy and criminality can't stay hidden forever. The lesson I took from the whole experience wasn't about HOAs specifically. It was about power and accountability. Anyone given authority over others has a responsibility to use that authority wisely and fairly. When they don't, when they abuse their position for personal gain or satisfaction, the system has to have ways to check them and hold them accountable. In Patricia's case, that accountability came from multiple directions. The legal system that prosecuted her crimes, the civil lawsuit that sought restitution for her victims, and the community that voted her allies off the board and replaced them with people who actually cared about serving rather than ruling. My role was simply to do my job, to investigate crimes and bring criminals to justice. The fact that the criminal happened to be someone who'd been harassing me was irrelevant to that job. If anything, it made me more careful to follow proper procedures and document everything, because I knew any hint of impropriety would undermine the case. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't back down when Patricia first called the cops on me for plowing snow. I'm glad I challenged the fine and filed the lawsuit and stood up for the principle that HOAs don't have unlimited authority to harass residents. Because if I'd just paid the fine and moved on, Patricia might have continued her crime spree for years, victimizing who knows how many more people. Sometimes standing up to a bully, even a small-time HOA bully, has consequences beyond what you can see in the moment. My fight with Patricia exposed her behavior to scrutiny, brought attention to HOA overreach, and created the conditions that eventually led to her being caught. I didn't know any of that would happen when I refused to pay the first fine. I just knew it was wrong, and I wasn't going to let it stand. That's the real lesson of the story, not the dramatic irony of the HOA president being arrested by the commander she'd called the police on, though that makes for a better headline. The real lesson is simpler and more important. Do what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it seems easier to just go along with unreasonable demands, and trust that eventually justice will prevail. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes the bullies win, and the good people get worn down by fighting systems that protect the powerful. But this time, in this case, with this particular HOA president and her particular crimes, justice prevailed. The bad guy went to prison. The community recovered. And I got to plow my driveway in peace. That's about as happy an ending as you can hope for in the real world.